Welcome to the Farm Life Podcast, brought to you by the Kings County Farm Bureau. I'm your host and executive director of the Farm Bureau, Dusty Ferentz, and our guest today is Garrett Gilcrease. Garrett was our first podcast guest and our first repeat podcast guest. Garrett, how you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Doing good.
Glad you could be back with us.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Yeah. So we wanted to bring you in today because recently you were elected as the chair of the Mid-Kings River Groundwater Sustainability Agency Stakeholder Advisory Committee.
Yes, I was.
You weren't at that meeting.
I know. I read the minutes too, and it says not present, voted chairman. So I need to clear my calendar better, I guess, in the future.
You need somebody to defend you in these meetings.
I tell you what, man. Yeah, thought I had friends in that room.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So since you were elected, that committee's met, I think, 3 times, right?
Yeah, twice,
I
believe. Since I got elected, we met 3 times total.
Okay.
So yeah.
So why don't you walk our listeners through like how we got here with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, what you've been tasked with by the board of directors, all that.
So the genesis of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, I think, goes back to when the original entity had it before. And there was supposed to be a Stakeholder Advisory Committee created. That was, for whatever reason, pushed off the back burner, and they never made one. And I think you combine that with a couple other things that were going on in that entity there, it just gave people a very sense of we don't have a voice in the process. So when they exited and the County Board of Supervisors came in, that was the first thing they created was the Grower Stakeholder Committee, or Advisory Committee. And that's where we're at now. So I think that growers really wanted to be a part of it. They wanted to have it. So they were in the room kind of identifying or having a part in the process, I'd say. We haven't met a whole lot up until now. It's been going over your plan as submitted before, where we were at. We have a meeting later today where we're going to go over different parts of that plan and start expanding the meat of that a little bit and dissecting it. But I'm thinking we got a good group. Things are looking pretty good in terms of our group getting something to the board so that they could approve or deny it. And then at least we're making progress on that. So,
yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean when you're getting into parts of the plan at these meetings?
So the plan has about, I'd say, 16 different parts. Or they called management objectives or something like that. And they use a lot of different terminology depending on which part you're looking at here. But long story short, it ranges anywhere from well metering policy, how that affects growers in terms of giving them their well information, if we can use those for monitoring wells too, to a pumping cap policy, the budget, pumping limits. And then it goes into recharge, whether it's basins that are already created with Kings County Water District, on-farm recharge, the mechanisms of that. All that together is what you're looking at with this plan. The first one we're looking at, though, is the well meter policy and the well registration policy today. So we've gone through the whole plan as an overview, but now we're going to start giving suggestions and alterations to that current plan to make it fit what we would like to see. So we're starting at the very top, and then we're going to keep going line by line based on those to see if we can create that plan.
Yeah, that's an in-depth process. There's a lot to these 16 different sections, I'm sure. Several hundred pages.
The last one submitted was 1,000 pages or more, maybe. Yeah. I don't know why it has to be 1,000 pages, but it was. So there's a lot to it.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys are already able to get into policies and dissect policies that were previously adopted and try and determine if they're going to work moving forward.
If they're going to keep those, or if we want to throw them out, or just to make adjustments to them. So
yeah. So do I have it right that the Stakeholder Advisory Committee is going to review those and then possibly consider making alterations or suggestions to update or keep the policies as written?
Correct. Yeah. So a good example is the meter policy. Some GSAs want to use Land IQ only. Others want to use meters. I think most of them have an option to do both. We want to have both.
Yeah.
I think it's well within a grower's right to say, I want to meter it this way or meter it this way. My personal feelings, I think most people are going to move to meters anyway,
Mhm.
just because if you're using satellite data, you're going to want a meter to rectify that
Right.
or charge against that a little bit and just check and make sure that's correct. So I think we'll eventually get there, but that's one of the policies there of like having that laid out in such a way that A, it's clear to the grower. It is open for them to use whichever one they want, but then making it structured enough that both the GSA and the state can say this is a robust policy. Good example is having to pick which one you want to use at the beginning of the year. Kind of like when you go to the county and go see Jimmy for a permit, you got to tell him, hey, I got these crops, these crops, these crops, and this is what we want to do for the year. And you're kind of set up unless you do some crop changes throughout the year. That was one of the suggestions there is you got to pick one and you're going to run with it.
Yeah.
Another aspect of that is homeowners. That was a big one that this office got a lot of questions from. I know I got a lot of questions about it too. Is I have a home well, do I need to have a meter? With the previous group, there wasn't a whole lot of, I think they were kind of building the plane as they were flying it. My goal is to have it very clear cut. This is what's going to happen. And the first part is if I got my way, homeowners wouldn't need to have a meter. I think that's an expense that people don't need to spend. And when you look at the state's view, they're de minimis anyways. So they kind of fall outside of Sigma, at least on the onset. So it's kind of giving clarity and options so that when you go into this thing, there's not a whole lot of gray.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a domestic well would need a meter.
No, it just seems like a massive expense to verify what we probably already know, that they're
Right.
not using a whole lot of water.
Right.
So in comparison to the big scheme of things.
Right.
So yeah, that's a long and short of it there.
Yeah.
A good example of one policy is a meter policy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think reviewing these things the way you guys are is going to be the only way that you build trust of the landowners in the GSA.
That is probably the single biggest part of the pie that was missing last time. Is that the plan is only as good as the people enforcing it, and the trust you have in the process of that enforcement. And that was lacking in the last plan. I think you look at parts of the plan, there are parts of it that didn't make a whole lot of sense, like no clarity on meters for homeowners, at least at the beginning. But then there were other parts that, I mean, without knowing anything else, weren't that far out of bounds. So you look at the plan as a whole, I think there were things that we could probably work with here.
Yeah.
But you didn't have a whole lot of faith in the system.
Exactly.
And my hope is that with the county and this new stakeholder committee, that we can restore faith in the system. So when we do bring a plan forward, there's a little more thought of working together, not working against people.
Yeah.
Right? So get a little more buy-in.
Is the GSA, are you aware of any conversations at the GSA to have like a communications plan and share some of this information with landowners outside of these meetings?
Yeah, we haven't got there yet. Number one, the meetings are public. Number two, just like with the County Board of Supervisors, if you want to get on that list, they're pretty transparent. You won't get kicked off if you piss somebody off like some of us were last time. So I think that would be a good way to start. But I was writing some notes before this next meeting that I think having the plan very clear cut, black and white, easy to understand from the genesis makes communication a whole lot better too.
Right.
Because you can have one or two sheets per policy on a website of like, hey, if you don't know, go here. Homeowner, don't need a meter. This is our initial pumping cap limit. These are your dates you need to decide whether you want to use open or land IQ or a meter. And it's going to be a lot more granular than that. But I mean, you can have the highlights there and make it very easy to find the information. But if you don't have it, you know where to go to get it.
Sure.
So that would be my hope.
It can be and should be that simple.
It's not rocket science. It really isn't. I mean, is it going to be perfect? No. But is it have the potential to be much better than the last one? I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you did a pretty deep dive there on the metering policy you guys are going to discuss. What was the second policy you said?
Well registration.
Okay.
That's going to be the big one. And so well registration, again, myself included, I was like, do I want to give them that information? Because I just didn't know what it was going to be used for, right? Growers are in a bad position now with Sigma in that it's coming. We're not going to destroy it. You can't get away with not complying. But I think there's a way to a great example is I use our county as the ag inspector, right? Or the Jimmy over there. They're kind of the cops for DPR.
Oh, 100%.
They're 100% the cops for DPR. But the way they approach it, they're not, you don't think they're pulling the handcuffs out before they get out of the car, right? They want to work with you. And as long as you work with them, you'll find something that is agreeable and you move on. I want the same thing here. But giving up information like where your well's at, how deep it is, that can be fairly personal, especially under the political situation right now.
Yeah.
So again, making it very clear that this information will be designed to create the plan, not exact punishment on individuals, is going to be a big step. Again, I think it's not what you say, it's how you say it most of the time. And if we communicate in such a way, be very upfront, is everyone going to be happy? No. But I think we can go a long way compared to where we were last time. And that also helps us from a financial point of view too, because if we know where all these wells are at, the records in both Kings County and the state of California, not great. They're not.
Yeah.
On the state of California one, they use records of no wells ever been abandoned since 1940. Yeah. So you plug that thing in 1941, it's still operating and pumping all kinds of water. So their numbers were pretty skewed as to how many wells are active and how many might go dry if we had a problem. The county's records, on the other hand, have some holes in it too, because if I don't use a well anymore, I'm supposed to go there and tell them, hey, we're not using it, it's abandoned. No one really does that. So that could be inflated too as to how many wells we actually have. And then the other aspect of that too is monitoring wells. So we've got monitoring wells within Mid-Kings River GSA, but we don't quite have enough. We got pockets in there that don't have any representation. So if we had an idea where these wells were at, we had growers that want to be a part of the process, you could kill two birds with one stone, in that if the well fits the metrics, it could be used as a monitoring site as well. How we get there and how we get that done might be a bigger jump than you and I really hope for. But it's an option that could help us get the data we need to make the right decisions and reduce the costs that everyone has to pay. Because those metering wells, they're expensive.
Yeah.
You're paying prevailing wage. I mean, it's very, very cost prohibitive. So if we can get away with that or get away from that, I think it'd be better for everybody.
There's enough infrastructure that exists already. We should be able to find a place to get that data. Exactly.
It's just getting people on board to at least being open to having a discussion about that. Because we know, like I say, Sigma's coming, and I'm doing what I'm doing, you're doing what you're doing, everyone here in this office too, is trying to just make it to where people can farm as long as they possibly can, at the highest level they can, under the guise of Sigma.
Right.
So that's it.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
In the previous iteration of the well registration policy, or the current one you guys are reviewing, there was a component that required domestic wells to be registered.
Correct.
Have you guys talked about that at all yet at the stakeholder committee?
We haven't got that deep. I think it would be nice to know where they're at, but I also think the county's records on domestic wells are probably better than ag wells.
Right.
For the reason being is, number one, if you build a house out there, you got to have a permit, and that's part of your permit. And my guess is every new well they put in that might be a bigger one would have a permit associated with it. That's making some assumptions. I think you want to know where they're at just from an aspect what the state would want to know.
Yeah.
Because, for example, one meeting, my part of the county, our house wells are like 29 feet, 32 feet, like super shallow, A-zone, typical water. But you go other places of the county, they're 150, 200, 300, 400 feet. So they go into that B zone. So they make up part of, if this B zone drops, you've got that many domestic wells that could be affected. So we're going to need to know where they're at and roughly how deep they are to create that number, to know if what we come up with, a starting pumping allocation, and how that's going to travel through the next couple of years, if we need to adjust that. So we have groundwater levels we look at. but it gives you an idea of what kind of freight train you might be seeing if groundwater levels drop by 40 feet or something like that. So you're going to want to know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That seems to make a lot of sense.
Yep.
So as people hear this, your advisory committee meeting will have already happened.
Yeah.
And that's quite an agenda for one meeting for a couple of hours on a Monday.
We're going to have a lot of homework.
You're going to have a lot of homework. What's your guys' meeting frequency? What's your meeting schedule looking like moving forward?
We meet once a week. So pretty intense in that regard. Up until now, it's been review of the current plan. We're going to divulge now and take a little bit of an exit and start getting into the meat of the plan. It's a lot to go over. But again, like I go back to the beginning, was the plan complete garbage? I don't think so. So it's a good framework to jump off of. We're not trying to create this from scratch.
Right.
And so that makes it good. I'm a good one. If I see a blank piece of paper, I don't know what to do. But if I see something on paper, I know I don't like that and I want to change it to something like that. So it helps me. We know what we have now or what was presented before. We know where we need to get to, and making some adjustments to make that work is where it's going to be still a lot of work. But I think we can get there. But we're going to need to really drill down on those two today, figure out how far we get. I think we're going to have to come back in a week with some stuff we did during the week so that we don't just start over the next week. So, because we have the benefit of some time now, but it's not a lot of time.
It's not endless.
We can't just sit around and just wait for something to happen. So, it'd be my goal to have something fairly ground out for people by the end of the year. If not before that.
Okay, that was gonna be my next question. What is your overall timeline look like?
I again, I'm speaking for myself now. This isn't the rest of the board, but I think it's in everyone's best interest that we get this in front of everybody as soon as possible, and they can digest it, answer questions, because again, it's coming. We got to have a 218. We got to have a policy in place that we can then send to DWR. And see what they say about it. So, but until we get there, we can't do anything.
Right.
So I want to push as hard as we can to get something pretty firmed out that we can roll out to the public. So.
Yeah. You guys got a lot of work on your hands, and I hope to see it done by the end of the year. That would be great, I think.
I think it's doable. But again, these things, sometimes you get bogged up. You got government involved now at the county board of supervisors, which again, it's not a knock on them. It's just how it works.
Just the way it is.
They got a lot of stuff on their calendar. So hopefully we can do that and keep to that timeline. But if not, then we'll just do what we can, I guess.
How many people are on the committee right now?
I want to say there's 11 of them.
That's the number that I'm thinking too.
I think it's 11. I got their names in my head. I won't out them on the podcast, but there's 11 of them. And then I want to say we have 5 or 6 alternates as well.
Yeah.
It's a good group. It's a group that comprises people north to south, east and west. We got a good matrix of shallow water users, deep water users. And so the meetings have been good thus far. A lot of questions, a lot of engagement. But I think today and the meetings after this are going to be a real test of coming together and making an agreement as to what our policies are going to be. So it's yet to be determined how that works out. But the guys are on the committee with me, all pretty level-headed individuals. So that's a great starting point.
That's a great starting point. I think it's important to remind people that you guys are all doing this as volunteers to try and come up with a plan that works for you and your neighbors and your colleagues, right? And meeting once a week for 2-3 hours a week and doing homework in between weekly meetings. I mean, you guys have taken on a full-time job on top of having 2 or 3 full-time jobs already.
Oh yeah. I need to send a note to like the labor relations board or something because I don't get paid anything for it. But you're right. I mean, it's a lot of work, but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
And I think I'd rather be a part of the process and say I tried rather than just put my head in the sand and it is what it is. Because we know if we don't get a plan approved by the state, there's some other avenues here, but they just take over.
Right.
And I mean, this is a state where Gavin Newsom, our glorious governor, he goes to Washington and wants some money from him, and then he signs a bill that just basically give him big F you.
Uh-huh.
That's the people we do. And if we can keep them in Sacramento and let us manage ourselves here locally. Is it great? No, but it's better than, I think, the alternative. And I hope I can be a part of it. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you guys should be commended for all the hard work that you're doing and the effort you're putting into this.
I don't know if we'll get commended or arrows thrown our way, but we'll see.
Well, let's at least try and limit the arrows. How about that?
There we go. There we go. Yeah.
So the burning question that we get here at the Farm Bureau all the time is, what's the pumping cap going to be? What's the sustainable yield going to be? I don't expect an answer today, but do you have any idea when you guys might start talking about your pumping policy?
It's come up already. And it's come up under the pretenses of, this is the data we have in terms of subsidence, groundwater levels since the beginning of time, XYZ. And you can see a couple things. You can see that groundwater levels have been declining. The wet years, it comes back up. Dry years, it goes back down. So it shows that we do need to reduce pumping. 2, it also shows that subsidence is a problem. Again, the data shows it. How strong is the data? I don't know, but I'll qualify that in a second. So you got those 2 issues, and then you have water quality. The water quality one is going to be a hard one to put your finger on because you can't really control it. But I think that's the position we're in. So that's going to be a part of it too. But my biggest challenge is that data is what I would call, it's not tainted data, but it's almost like you're making a decision in a vacuum of any other outside influence, right? All that data is no pumping restrictions at all. So, and we talked about meters. A lot of stuff didn't have meters. People weren't using ET, Land IQ, all that kind of stuff. We're in a brand new world now in terms of restrictions, not only in our GSA, but others as well. And so we don't know what kind of influence that's going to have. So I could come to you and say, hey, your pumping cap in the B zone is going to be 3 feet. I don't know. I think we need to pick somewhere and start. I think it needs to be enough because look, we have to be sustainable by 2040.
Right.
And my view of the law is that we want to have gut checks using the well registration data we have and groundwater levels through the monitoring wells we have, subsidence levels, all that kind of stuff as a guide as we go through year by year to see if we need to make adjustments. But I think if anybody can sit there and say, oh, this is your yield, we don't really know. So we don't know if there's wells out there pumping 6 or 7 feet a year because they're double cropping this. Could be. Maybe there isn't. Maybe we institute a cap everywhere, i.e. in Kauai, Westlands, all these things. And it just keeps on going down, down, down. Well, then we have to ratchet it down more. But maybe when we have these restrictions come in and we cut off some of those high pumpers that are just pumping excessively, maybe it has a bigger influence than we know. Long story short is we're not going to know if a plan works, until we implement it. And we're not going to know if it works until we know the outside influences that are having their impact, positive or negative. And so back to your question, I can't tell you what it's going to be. I know the beginning it was 1/2 foot in the A zone, 3 feet in the B zone, 2 feet in the C zone. This is me talking here. I think that that doesn't sound too out of bounds to me in terms of a starting point. I think that there are issues in certain parts of that, though, especially the A zone. If you're right on the river and it runs for 1/2 a week and you're back up to 7 feet, it's like there are those situations. But again, as I talked about Jimmy and his department, they'll work with you.
Right.
Like there's got to be enough wiggle room in here in such a way that you can allow for these wells and areas that might be outside the norm to function while not restricting everything. So that's probably going to be the hardest part right there, is making a plan that would be reduce the pumping enough to be sustainable, but also have enough ability to accept everyone. So I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Oh, it completely does.
Yeah.
You did a great job explaining one of the biggest problems with any law or regulation. They're written on paper and they're black and white, but the real world doesn't accommodate that. And
you're working with Mother Nature.
Yeah.
This isn't like, making paper or something, right? You got that down to a science and there you go. This is a lot of stuff, and the engineers are great. Amir down there, really enjoy him. He seems like a really nice guy. But at the end of the day, he can only make decisions based on the data he's given.
Yeah.
Right? And we just do not know if the pumping to the east of us, the north, the south, and the west of us, what kind of influence that exactly has. And I've been in agriculture enough and doing R&D enough that you go into one situation thinking it's going to be this way, and you're like, what the hell just happened? There are things you just can't control or understand. And so you've got to leave the ability in there to be surprised, but I think it comes down to you implement the plan and you give guys the confidence to understand that we will do the best we can to adjust as the data comes in. And that could be where we have to cap more.
Yeah.
It could be where what we're doing is okay. I don't know. But I think to artificially go in there and say it's going to be 3 feet from now to the end of time, or to go say, hey, your sustainable yield is only half a foot. It's probably somewhere in between.
Right.
But two things is where do you start, where do you end, and how fast do you get there?
Yeah.
Those are the 3 metrics that we got to figure out. And I think that's what the law wants too. It doesn't want you sustainable tomorrow. It wants you on a path of sustainability with leverage you can pull to make yourself sustainable by 24. And that's what the plan's got to have.
Yeah. That's the way the law is written. The people trying to enforce the law outside of the sub-basin.
And that's the trouble too. And you get to like, why am I doing this? So I can shed light on that and see that coming and help local people around identify where that is. Like, hey, the law is X, but they're doing Y.
Yeah.
And it comes down to what Farm Bureau is doing too, right? It's the law is the law, follow it. But it's not a free ticket to just do whatever the hell you want.
As a regulator.
Yes, but unfortunately that's the state we live in and that's how they do things. But I think that's why we need to come together and stay solid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
a major motivator for us deciding to sue the state water board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The big one.
The big one.
The big one.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And what an undertaking that has been.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But a good one.
Oh, certainly worth the effort.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. I mean, it's really, I mean, without Farm Bureau, I don't know where we'd be right now. I mean, I think the state would just be here doing their thing.
Yeah.
Probably. Or have a local agency kind of being a quasi-state agency. I don't know. But one thing that what Farm Bureau has done is given people like myself and the Stakeholder Committee time to go over these plans and create something without the state breathing down your neck. Yeah. Right. And I think that some people look at that as a bad thing, as they won't talk to us. We were just going to get that information. And I can see their point. But at the end of the day, if you're dealing with a state agency that would like nothing more than you just to go away. And if you think that you were going to get that information from them at the next time, right before they pulled the plug, they're no different than the guy that's friend zoned with his best friend, right? I mean, you think, oh, I got a chance. It's just at some point you got to pull the plug and just say, okay, we're going to fight this. Yeah. So that's my personal opinion. But again, I can see both sides. But either way, at the end of the day, with Farm Bureau doing what we did, it gives us the ability to work freely under a time constraint, but not as tough a constraint as it could have been. Right. So. Right.
We built some runway.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We built some runway. Yeah, hopefully we can keep it going so we can get this plan done and get moving.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I'm going to put you on the spot here. So if you don't have the answer, that's all right.
Okay.
But did you bother to figure out on your family's operation how much you've saved because of Farm Bureau's lawsuit?
So, okay, that's a tough one because we had so much surface water the last couple of years. So we kind of artificially didn't have a whole lot of pumping restrictions anyway. But I mean, it was easily, gosh, let's just say the state water board wanted $20 an acre foot. Yep. Right.
Plus a $300 per well registration fee.
Yep. So that's a couple $1,000 right there, if not more, just in the well registration. Then you have a foot times, and I'd say maybe I pumped a foot, maybe half a foot last year, depending on the ranch there. But you're looking at what's 20 times around 600 feet. You can do the math, podcasters at home. But I mean, it's a lot of money. It's a ton of money, and it's a ton of money in a season where we're going through an agriculture $12,000 there just on that. Then you have the GSA fees if that had gone through of $95 a foot, so 95 times 600 there. God, math whiz doing
That's right.
It's a ton of money.
Yeah.
And 57,000 plus 12 plus all that. So yeah, easily 70 grand.
Yeah.
Probably. And that's just me. I'm not a big guy either.
Right.
I'm not huge. There's other guys that are a lot bigger than I am. A lot of guys don't have as much surface water, X, Y, Z. But either way, whether it's 70 grand, 700 grand, or $5,000, every dollar is needed right now.
Yeah.
We are in the midst of an agriculture recession. And potentially could get worse with tariffs and things like that. That's entirely possible, depending on the ag locale and the commodity and things like that. But either way, we're not rolling dough right now. California is the most expensive state to live in. Our taxes are the highest they've been. If you're pumping using electricity, I want to say those rates have doubled or tripled in the last 5 or 7 years.
Right.
Minimum wage is going up. Fuel's going. You just name it. But you look at commodity prices and they've actually gone backwards.
Right.
So you don't have, the big notion is that, you rich farmers have all this money. They look at 3 people that have a bunch of money, the most prominent ones. And I hate to tell you, but most of their money didn't come from farming.
Right.
It came from somewhere else and they farmed with it or started a farm with it way back. And that's just not the normal everyday person, but the normal everyday person is the one that's going to get slaughtered with something like this.
Yeah.
And so are we going to be able to farm the same cost of money we're doing now with all these Sigma fees? I mean, they're going to come. We're going to have to pay for this somehow. But again, $70,000 is a lot of money. But if it's something you have to do to farm, okay. But the other part of it is knowing that money is going to go for what it's used to be or what it needs to be.
Right.
And it's going to be used judiciously. And I think that's the big part of having this grower committee. Because I love people in government. They're great. But it's different. Just slushes in. Let's just have it.
Yeah.
A lot of times we got to spend it before the end of the year so our budget stays the same next year, right? And so you want to get away from some of those things. I think our county is better than most at that. But it's still just a component of it. And so having a grower-focused committee that can not only look at this plan, adjust it, communicate it to the public, and hopefully become a long-standing part of this thing, it's going to give you that ability or that comfort level. Say, hey, that money I'm paying is actually being used what it's supposed to be. It's not wasteful. And it's just what you got to do. Again, not everyone's going to be happy. I'm not happy about it. I wish I could pay it.
Yeah.
But it's going to be here. I just want to make sure that money is being used the way it's supposed to be. It's not or not.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
And your example was great. You painted a really good picture, and going to ask you to put your Farm Bureau hat on for just a second. But I asked you about the savings on your operation to try and give an answer to some of our naysayers out there that don't necessarily support our efforts against the state water board. Just in the first year, in this one example, savings of hundreds of dollars an acre, tens of thousands of dollars in one irrigation season. That might motivate somebody in itself to change their mind a little bit on what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yep.
Because at those rates, that would have provided the state water board a ton of money to do God knows what with, and likely much more than they needed to run a program in the sub-basin.
Yeah, I think putting my Farm Bureau hat on and those kinds of savings, and I get it. There's people saying, "Oh, that was I got told one time that was the dumbest thing could ever happen," X, Y, Z. But you're looking. So I look at this 2 ways. Number one, the environmental groups sue the state all the time. Number two, they're buddies with them. You saw it at the state water board meeting. In fact, the lawyer that we have was buddies with them too.
Yeah.
Right. It's a job and it's part of doing business, unfortunately. I think we as agriculture have, and it's easy to do. You become what your environment is. And our environment is, like I told you, high prices or high costs of growing goods, low commodity prices, which means you got to focus a lot of effort on that business. We're not farming in Iowa. We're not farming in the Midwest. Rainfall comes. Okay, we do this. We got to spray a couple of times a year. I mean, it's a much slower way of life over there. You can donate a lot of your mental capital to other things there. Here we don't. You got to focus on farming so you can be profitable next year. And you end up forgetting about some of these things. And 1 year goes by, a decade goes by, and the fights haven't, other people have taken the fights on, or we've lost the fights. And then you start losing maybe like, oh, nothing's going to happen. It's good money after bad and all this kind of stuff. But I think I get it. And I talked to someone the other day, they first thought there's no way it's going to happen. Then we got the TRO, right? The restraining order.
Right.
Oh, okay. Then we got the injunction. Oh, wow, I got to eat crow now.
Yeah.
And whether you agree with how it started or where it's at, what you can agree with is the numbers and cents of what you saved this last year, what you're going to save this year.
Yeah.
But there's two other things too. Is that, I forgot one of them now already. But the other one is the implications it's going to have going into the future.
Yeah.
You've got young kids. I got them. Compounding interest, right? You put money away early, it becomes a lot of money later, and it's better than starting later. If we can get in this process now and have the ability to adjust not only how they work with our basin, but how they work with other basins. And I think you can see that too. There was a previous good actor clause. Don't even worry about that. Not on the table. The next one, oh, hey, you guys don't have to do this. These other guys, you do. Who knows if that's because of us? I don't know. But it sure seemed very coincidental if it wasn't.
Right.
But that is golden.
Yeah.
Right there. So, and the other thing too is I think that we as an agriculture community, not just Mid-Kings, this is California ag in general, this is ag in general. We end up giving an inch, give an inch, give an inch, give an inch, give an inch, and you end up on this sliver of land and you don't have a whole lot of leverage anymore. And I want to get back to fighting a little bit.
Yeah.
I would rather try to stand up for what's right for the farmer and completely fail than just say, it's not worth the time and still fail.
Right.
And other people have a different comfort level, and that's okay. But I think from my point of view and Farm Bureau's point of view, it was even beyond the money, multitudes value to everybody here doing what we did and having the success we did. And hopefully we can parlay that into holding the state accountable of black and white. This is what the law says. You got to stay within those confines. Because whether we're talking about SGMA, whether you're talking about environmental policy, we're talking about, laws around traffic and everything, they've got parameters they have.
Yeah.
And I mean, people fight back when it doesn't work that way. I don't think ag should be any different. So that's just my personal view. So.
Garrett, I think that's a great note to go out on. You summarize a lot of our conversations around Farm Bureau about fighting back and why this was a good endeavor from our perspective. So I think we'll button it up there. We will ask any of our listeners that haven't already to consider contributing to our SGMA Defense Fund. You can find information on that at kcfb.org. Come by the office. We're happy to talk to you about it anytime. And hopefully this conversation shows that there's a good group at the Mid-Kings River GSA trying to do some good work for all of you. But also Farm Bureau has our community and our state in mind as we're endeavoring on this epic battle with the State Water Resources Control Board. We don't stand to gain from it, but all of you guys do.
Yep, exactly right.
Thanks, Garrett.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.